This is The Drive on 93.7 The Ticket.
I gotta do what I gotta do.
Jake Bogus and Nick Bahr.
Come on now.
This is The Drive.
Streaming online at theticketfm.com.
It is a throwback Thursday.
Yeah.
The Drive. You're going to hear some classic hip-hop. This is my all-time favorite hip-hop song, by the way.
I ain't no joke.
Yeah.
I love it.
I ain't no joke, Nick. You know who else isn't a joke? Brian Munson,
There
Big Red
is.
Report. How's that for transition?
That's
Did you
a
like
nice
that?
segue.
Brian Munson, Big Red Report, FoxSports.com. I feel like Brian and I have more lively conversations off air than we do on air, and then I feel like I get in this question and answer mode. But you can get Brian fired up because Brian told me before the season, he said, Jake, I'm telling you, I think the defense is going to be better than people think this year.
Right.
And so when I called him today, I said, Brian, what happened? So, Brian, I'm going to let you explain. What happened?
That Magic 8 ball was faulty, and I threw it away. I think, guys, from my standpoint and from watching, I don't think we had a clear sense of anything from Southern Miss. Let's get that out of the way. I mean, I don't think Southern Miss, number one, is a very capable football team. I think that they're talented. I just don't think that they're capable of doing a lot on the football field. I think that they'll get there, but that really wasn't a very good benchmark to go ahead and take against UCLA, and where the defense actually was prepared to handle UCLA. Going into UCLA, though, I think Nebraska was literally outcoached on from a UCLA offensive standpoint to a Nebraska defensive standpoint. They had ways of exploiting Nebraska's defense, particularly with motion. I think also there's the aspect of how Nebraska failed to realize and take advantage of two true freshmen, one redshirt freshman offensive lineman, and continue to line up a yard off the ball and allow those guys to come out and just pound at Nebraska's defensive line as opposed to taking it to them. I'm sorry, I'll go ahead and continue. I'll wrap this up real quick. But the other part I just don't get, guys, is I think philosophically there's a disconnect, and that is that Nebraska does not want to provide pressure with the up front forward, kind of more maintain and take guys out of play when it comes to offensive linemen, and usually it's a 2-to-1 deal. But that being said, that Nebraska then wants to go ahead and put the pressure back on their secondary and allow guys, the drawback quarterbacks, to have time to operate and to really take things apart. And I think as a defensive back, if you're allowing 3+ seconds to any wide receiver, it's a long time. It's an eternity out there running around chasing guys, and it's usually not going to be a good situation.
Brian, sometimes you don't know if things kind of maybe gain steam and you don't know how much validity there is to it, because you hear all the time about how complicated Bo's scheme can be, and there are so many guys talk about how thick the defensive playbook is, and it's harder than any class they take and all those things. How much of that is valid, and how much of that is some of the mistakes being that, or being some of the mistakes just being lack of talent?
I think that there's a lot to that. And I think that there's going to be a need, or there is a need at least, to simplify some things and kind of build upon, build bricks layer upon layer, and as opposed to jumping right into the deep end of the pool and say, this is what we're going to run. I think that from a talent standpoint, I believe the talent's there. That there are guys that are on that football team that I think that if you're put them in a better situation, I guess my example that I keep coming back to, guys, is when Bo was brought in with Frank Solich as the head coach, he basically returned the same defense that was there the year before. And organizationally, Bo just cleaned some things up. And he was able to implement his defense. He was able to get in there, and the defense performed 100% better than what it did the year before. So I don't think it's completely about not being a talented team. I think there's a need to go ahead and simplify some things and not have to have linebackers know the entire defense and who's going to be going where and who's doing what. And get back to realistically what you're supposed to be doing on a particular play, and really just let those guys go out there. Because I think football is a thinking man's game if you're requiring them to think before the ball is snapped. If you've got guys that are thinking when after the ball is snapped and they're running around thinking about stuff, they are not going to be flying around as fast as they could be doing if it was just instinctive.
He is Brian Munson, Big Red Report and FoxSports.com. We talked about this earlier, Brian, but does Nebraska need to play their odds better with the kind of recruits that they are bringing in? Because if you get 3 or 4 4-star players, there's a chance, like Nebraska has seen, that 2 or 3 of those guys may transfer or not pan out or just quit the team. And I know this is easier said than done, but do they need to just get more 4-stars, more 5-stars?
I think it's pretty difficult to just go. I don't think that there's any reason why Nebraska wouldn't want to go out there and just nab a complete 5-star class if you could have it. I find problems with that because I think that there are levels of entitlement as they come through the rankings, and I think that varies from player to player. But I think that there's also guys that are role players that make 5-star guy players better when they get to school and they see the way a 3-star guy works and how he takes a more talented 5-star guy and makes him realize his potential by watching the 3-star guy work. That being said, I think it's easier said than done when you talk about Nebraska, because I literally went back through and reviewed the uncommitted prospects that are still concerning Nebraska. There's only one 5-star guy that's still talking about even visiting Nebraska. And it's Priest Willis. I mean, other than that, there are no other ones on the board that maybe potentially Nebraska's going to find a way to bring in a couple guys that are committed to other schools. We're talking about straight up guys that are not committed anywhere else. There's only one right now, according to Scout.com, that's still considered Nebraska, and that's Priest Willis. So I think it's a little bit tough to do.
But from what you saw on Saturday against UCLA, and I know you're a recruiting guru, from the players that Bo Pelini has on his team right now, can he fix it? Can this be? I'll just throw out a number. Can this be a top 40 defense by the end of the year?
I think so. I really do. I think that there are some things that I think that people are starting to figure out and realize a little bit about two-gapping and not wanting to be up in a guy's face, but yet the 1 yard allowing 330-pound guys to just maul your 285 to 260-pound defensive ends is not working. And I think that also you're trying to find ways to. I think Nebraska. What UCLA showed me too was that the security blanket in Levante David is gone. It's not returning.
Yeah.
And the athleticism that's there that's not there anymore at the linebacker spot. They need to find ways to compensate for that. And I think a lot of talk's gone on this week about bringing in a 3-4 style, finding different ways to scheme players. And I think that that's what you have to do. When you don't have the Levante Davids and you don't have the talent that you had from the year before and you're still waiting for some guys to develop to get on the football field, you find different ways to plan to get players on the field that can make plays. And that's going to involve, changing it up from an even front to an odd front. That's going to require some different blitz packages. But I don't think Nebraska's going to have the luxury anymore of going ahead and dropping off 7 guys in the pass coverage and letting 4 stay up there because they have the talent back there in the secondary. That's not going to happen. They're going to have to bring at least 5 guys and get some pressure on the quarterback going forward.
Talking Huskers with Brian Munson here on the Drive 93.7 The Ticket. Nick Baugh, Jake Bogus with you. 3 players transfer in the last month. 3 isolated. Is this 3 isolated incidents, or is this something to be concerned about in your estimation?
Wow. I think with Aaron Green, that's a completely isolated incident. Green's who you're talking about, right? The first one?
Yeah, I'm talking about Tyler Moore, Klatchko, and now Chase Rome. You're
right. So I was going back a little bit too far. But going back to Green, Green's completely isolated. I think there are potentially, theoretically, some theories that you can kind of come up with when it comes to those other 3 players.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are joint. About, you start looking at guys that are younger, that had some upperclassmen in front of them. So maybe some guys thought that in their minds they should have been getting that playing time and that they should have been the ones that have been on the field over some other players. And maybe it just wasn't adding up to the people around them, and especially the coaching staff that could not justify that thought back to the player. That's the first thing that pops out to me.
Okay.
And now it's clear, though, from where those guys were at, and watching. I didn't have a chance to watch Klatchko at Nebraska. Klatchko's a very talented high school player, but Tyler Moore was definitely a talented player, and Chase Rome in his own right were very talented players. I think that they could have gone ahead and stuck this out and been part of the Nebraska picture going forward. I just don't think that they were there this year and were able to make an impact, and I think that was probably what was most frustrating to them.
Brian Munson, Big Red Report, joins us on The Drive, 93.7 The Ticket and theticketfm.com. All right, you mentioned the two-gap, you mentioned different blitz packages, but the one thing that has me not necessarily concerned, but just curious, is this 3-4 scheme they're talking about maybe implementing. Are you just gonna do that for Arkansas State, Idaho State? Because you probably are going to have 4 down linemen coming when you enter conference play, right, Brian?
Well, I actually think the 3-4 might have been something that Nebraska might have wanted to roll out for a team like Wisconsin, and instead they're figuring out that the defense isn't where they need it to be with an even front, and they're having to unveil it a little bit early. And I don't think that necessarily the 3-4 is very revolutionary, and it's not, and it's going to be completely new to Nebraska and to games. Actually, you could go back to Missouri 2 years ago, and they did a lot of odd man fronts in that game. And I think it's been put in, from week to week to week to possibly use in some various situations, and it's just never really come up. Against Missouri 2 years ago, they used it a lot. I think what's going to be interesting is watching the personnel packages there, guys. I think it's going to be interesting to see who's out there on the football field all at the same time. I'm going to be very interested to see, and of course, what Baker could do potentially as a nose. I think he gets a good push against an individual blocker. I'm just, Arkansas State's got a very good offense. They put up 500 yards against Oregon. They put up over 600 against Memphis. And I just, that's obviously where Nebraska's weak spot is, and Nebraska's in a retool week heading up to a good offense. It usually doesn't spell good things for the outcome of the game.
Any chance there's going to be, I think I know the answer to this question, some negative recruiting given what's happened here with all the transfers and whatnot?
Absolutely. 100%, no question, particularly like with a guy like Kyle Shortridge who came in, who's wanted to commit to Wake Forest, was told to go ahead and reconsider it, take a visit to Nebraska. I think that there's opportunities, though, by Nebraska to go ahead and run with this, particularly when you start talking about we got 2 open spots. Now you need to go out and a JC guy was kind of a luxury that you wanted to have in this class. JC now guy, a defensive tackle, has become a must, and it's a necessity. They've got to go out and find a guy, because you look at the depth chart there after, take Baker off of it. You bring back Randall, who's going to be your oldest player there. And after that, you start talking about Williams and Curry, and then you get down to, Vincent Valentine. Well, you need a guy that's going to come in as a junior and be a kind of a difference maker. Plus, you want to have 2 guys at each spot there in an even front. I think that there's opportunities here for Nebraska to go out here and sell it, but it's clear that there will be some negativity that Nebraska's going to have to battle on the recruiting path for these players.
Hey, Brian, your cohort, Josh Harvey, he mentioned on Tuesday, as far as recruiting goes, he's always shocked. I know this is just his second year covering the team. He's shocked that some recruits will say after they visit Nebraska, wow, I had no idea Nebraska was ever that good. Are Bo Pelini and company doing a good enough job of letting commits know what they need to know about the University of Nebraska football program? There have been a lot of questions about that, not just this year, and comments by recruits to me since Bo Pelini became the head coach, that not only just reference how successful Nebraska has been on the football field, but how successful Nebraska has been off of it. I find it completely interesting and somewhat strange that a player has to go take a visit to Nebraska to understand that they lead the NCAA in academic All-Americans. I think that would be something that Nebraska would want to pound their chest about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would be one of the first things that when a parent picks up a letter from Nebraska, they don't want to see the big guys sit in the gym sweating, bench pressing 500 pounds. They want to read about how their son's going to walk out there with an education. And I think they want to read about the graduation rates that Nebraska has and the fact that they had, the highest GPA, and it was at NCAA football or in the Big Ten or both. I think that they want to read about that stuff. And I think that those are some things that I would want to go ahead and tout a little bit more to these players. And I think that you're talking about now an age group, guys, that do not remember the 90s and when Nebraska was riding high. and was in, 4 consecutive national championship games. They don't remember that. They don't know anything about it. And I think that that's something that needs to be reiterated, and it needs to be an educational process to these players about where you're trying to get back to. Plus, we've got these other things going for us that you need to know about and you need to tell your parents about.
Brian, we always bring in a JUCO guy for an immediate impact, and there's been some talk this week that they've been looking at Santos and Zaire Anderson. Is Zaire Anderson ready to go? Ready to play this year, you think?
I think that he is. You know, the funny thing about Zaire Anderson was as a true freshman out of Riverside Community College, his film was pretty much extensively 3-4 walk-up outside linebacker. So he's familiar. Now, does that mean that it's going to be entirely, does it actually translate over to what Bo wants him to do? I think somewhat at least it does. But he's the kind of guy that you can pin his ears back and you can do some pretty interesting things with. I think the part that causes me some grief is that I've never really had a chance to watch Zaire Anderson play in a lot of space. He's been more of a guy that you want to tuck up near the line of scrimmage, that operates great in the box, that's tough. He's a scrappy tackler. He's not a big guy. He's athletic enough. He's more athletic than some other guys who've been put out there in the football field, so he's going to be an upgrade in that area. But what kind of a liability do you have now by putting him out there playing outside linebacker when he has to drop off into space? I think that there's going to be some ways to get him involved. I think there's going to be some other areas, like what we saw against UCLA, and just guarding a running back against a slant, where he's going to have some failures and where he's going to be a liability.
He is Brian Munson, Big Red Report and FoxSports.com. Brian, always enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much.
You bet you guys. Thanks for having me.